Hey everyone, it's just under 2 days until free agency when I'm recording this. Recording it on stream on Saturday night. Free agency opens Monday, kind of early evening Pacific time. And sort of by the time you're watching this, it'll probably be a day and a half until free agency opens. But one of the big stories that's been coming out of this free agency has been players who are currently under contract with the team, very good players, in some cases star or even superstar players, who appear to not have a place on that team for next year, but have not moved to another team yet, but are still under contract. So they haven't been released to free agency. They haven't had another team buy them out and give them a new spot. And so this is players like Rekkles, who Carlos said up front, like, here are some players that are not going to be on our team next year, and has been aggressively trying to move this player, even tweeting publicly and specifying buyout numbers publicly. Players like Jensen, who has said on stream that he's not sure he's going to have a team next year, and that, very strong rumors are out and not official yet, but that Bjergsen's going to be playing there. And so Jensen seems like he doesn't have a spot on Team Liquid, but is he going to be on another team or not? A player like Nisqy, who also said on stream he doesn't know if he's going to have a team next split. There are other players, like Mickey X on G2, similar situation as Rekkles, but not quite as high profile. We don't know if he's going to have a team. Players like this, and I want to talk about these players not from the macro circumstances of, why are players this good not getting a team, and why can nobody afford them? Why doesn't some other team just buy them out or whatever? I don't want to talk about all of that. I want to talk about what happens with these specific players if free agency passes and they end up without a team. A few days from now, they don't get moved. Nothing happens. What happens to these players? What happens to their contracts? Do they still get paid? Why would the teams, keep them under contract? All this kind of stuff. So I want to talk about this a little bit. I reached out over the past couple days to several different general managers and some player agents and things like that. I wanted to understand what happens to players in these circumstances. And I want to talk you through a little bit about what they shared with me, because I thought it was educational for me, and I thought maybe it'll be educational for you. So, let's talk about these players and what happens next with them, and not here to specify, which players I know for sure are going to be in these circumstances, because I don't know for sure. But for any of them that are, the number one question that I had, and that is confirmed by everybody, is yes, if they are still under contract with the team for next year, they will still receive a salary. So these players, just because they aren't playing on the roster, it doesn't mean like, oh, they don't get any money and they're just held in contract prison and they're not even getting paid. No, they're going to get paid. Some nuance around this, right? Let's say Jensen, because I think he was the first to say on stream he thinks he might not have a team, right? Let's say it's Jensen as our example. And he doesn't have a spot on Team Liquid. He doesn't get moved. He's going to be getting paid, but the amount he gets paid is going to depend on what was negotiated into his contract. So a lot of contracts, apparently, I don't know what percentage of these contracts, but a lot of them will have some specified level of reduced salary for like a non-starter salary. We'll call it a non-starter clause. And this will depend on what was negotiated into the contract. So if you're on the team, but you're not playing for the team and the team has, benched you or for whatever it is, you're going to be getting a lower rate of pay in a lot of cases. If you are a star player with a lot of leverage when you sign that contract, like Jensen was, that may be the same amount of pay. You maybe don't have a reduced amount, or maybe your reduction is not as big. Maybe you drop down to, I really don't know percentages. Nobody shared percentages with me, but maybe you only drop 25% of your pay compared to dropping 50% of your pay, something like that, right? So you can think that with players like Jensen, like Rekkles. Not sure about Nisqy, but they probably have some relatively favorable terms here for what their non-starter pay will look like. Okay. What if they get sent down to an academy team, which is more relevant in NA, can happen in EU as well. What if they play there? Well, they might also have a reduced salary level for in academy compared to LCS. In professional traditional sports, or I know in the NHL at least, this would be called a two-way contract. So you have a different salary level in the minor leagues and a different salary in the top level league. And a lot of contracts in League of Legends apparently have a similar thing. But again, if you're a player like a Jensen or a Rekkles, you probably have protection there, and that you were able to have that leverage in your negotiations to say, no, I don't want a reduced rate of pay if I go down to academy. I want to be protected against that, and that you're not going to drop my pay, by half or more, or whatever it might end up being. In hockey, again, I think that would often be, like a very significant reduction. Like a minimum salary in the NHL might be $750,000 US, and you could get dropped down, maybe even like 100 or 150,000, something like that. I'm pretty sure I've seen numbers like that before if you were dropped down to the American Hockey League. So, but once again, players like Jensen and Rekkles probably have favorable deals here that protect them from this. And so whether they're getting a non-starter pay rate or an academy, pay rate or something like that, they'll be pretty well protected. So that's what happens to players who are not playing, who are going to be on the bench. Now, what about the contract termination side of this? So this is something that I also asked about that I think gives some context on why the teams wouldn't just cut the players loose and end their contracts, because some of these players, maybe it comes around to December and they didn't move and they don't have a spot, and some of the orgs might say, all right, we're just going to release you from your contract and go on because we don't want to pay you that salary. And so what does that look like if they are going to terminate that contract? Well, the severance clause in a contract is also part of the negotiation when you sign that deal. The amount of money that the organization has to pay the player in order to sever the contract could be anything from the equivalent of 2 weeks' pay at the minimum. That's the lowest that anybody gave as an example to me, all the way up to 6 months' pay, or maybe even more. Although that seemed like it was a relatively extreme set of examples of extreme high end of the range. Something more like a month to 2-3 months, something like that might be a little more standard. I don't have any close numbers. But, and then again, if you're a very, very reputable star player with a lot of negotiation power, you might be able to get much more of your money guaranteed, which basically means, as far as I understand it, having a much stronger severance clause that you'd have to pay out I don't think anybody would have the full amount of their contract paid out. Maybe there is, I don't know. But, just a higher percentage of your remaining contract paid out. And again, players like Jensen and Rekkles, probably a lot more protection, much more kind of punitive severance clauses if the teams want to part ways with them. So that kind of gives some context on what happens if they are held in their contract with their team. Well, they've got, different rates of pay potentially in the contract. What happens if their contract gets cut by the team? Different amount of severance. And I think those are all things that then obviously get weighed into the team's decision when they're deciding, what do we do with this player? Hey, we don't want to play this player on our roster, but we weren't able to move them. Either we weren't able to get, nobody was able to fulfill the buyout price that we were asking for. If you were trying to sell this player to another org, or, just nobody was interested, or, maybe obviously you're not going to give them to another team for free unless you're just trying to dodge the severance, right? But these are all things that they have to consider is, what are we going to have to pay if we keep them on contract? What are we going to have to pay if we terminate the contract? How does that all arrive? So to kind of structure that into a bit of a decision tree, I guess, when would teams retain a player on contract, a player they've been unable to move, versus severing the contract? Well, they're going to retain the player if they have a favorable non-starter clause in that player's contract. So if they can keep that player and not play them, and then pay them, 50%, 20%, I don't know, 10% of their normal salary, it's probably not that low. That makes it easier to keep them because you're not getting punished financially as much. Or if you have very punitive severance terms in that contract, so ending the contract with them is going to hurt you a lot, and you're going to have to pay 6 months of their salary. And maybe you think, don't want to have to deal with that, we're going to hold on to them. And so if you then also pair that with a sense of what's the likelihood of this player being bought out mid-year, maybe we weren't able to move them now, but maybe somebody's spring went poorly. We look at the Abadaga scenario and say, hey, players can move between spring and summer split, and maybe we can get a buyout then. Obviously not as large of a buyout because you're only buying them for half a season instead of a full season, or the amount of time left on their contract. But if you weigh all of that and say, here's what it's going to cost us to keep this player on the bench and for all of spring split, but we think there's a 60% chance we can move them in between splits, and maybe that will come out ahead, or at least even, right? So those are some factors where you might hold on to the player and retain them. And there's also the factor of maybe you just don't want that player to play with your opponents, and you're willing to pay to keep them off the other teams. That's it makes me feel a little gross inside, but it's obviously a competitive factor. It's a competitive environment, right? On the other hand, when would you sever the contract? When would you release the player? Well, if there's a low likelihood of future buyout, you don't think there's a chance that you're going to be able to move them between spring and summer split, or let's say they have two years left in their contract right now, and you don't want to have to pay them for the full 2 years, and you don't think you can move them either between splits or a full year from now, the next off season, then you're going to say, well, there's no future payday waiting for me if I hold on to them. And also, if you don't have a non-starter clause, or you have a weak non-starter clause and you're going to have to pay them most or all of their money, even if they're on the bench, that obviously hurts a little bit more to hold on to them. And then if you have a very non-punitive severance clause, so if you're able to release them and only pay them 2 weeks, that makes it easier to release them as well, right? And then, of course, on top of that, if you're also not too worried about them going to another team and you don't think they're going to threaten you as a player on another roster, again, that makes it easier to release that contract. So this is all just a little bit of context. I don't think it's that complicated once you kind of talk through it and understand it a bit, but knowing that there are non-starter salaries in these contracts most of the time, and that there are severance clauses already baked in up front during the negotiation process, I think all of that makes it a lot more clear what kind of decisions these teams have to go through when they're deciding what do we do with a player that we don't want and we haven't been able to move. So I hope that kind of clarifies some things for you, and those gives you the right questions to ask when we probably end up with some players a few days from now who are still on a team, still under contract, but aren't going to be playing. And yeah, just hope that provides some context for you. All right, that's all for now. Thanks for watching.